And welcome to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case.
And I'm Renata Kiss.
And tonight we recap the latest Supreme Court rulings.
Meanwhile, illegal migrants continue to pour across the border.
And Israel prepares for war with Hezbollah. But first, we begin with all those updates from the Supreme Court, starting with a gun ruling that came out on Friday. In an 8-1 decision, the court decided to uphold a federal law banning people under restraining orders specifically for domestic violence from owning guns. In the majority opinion, Chief Justice John Roberts said, quote, "Since the founding, our nation's firearm laws have included provisions preventing individuals who threaten physical harm to others from misusing firearms." The lone dissent in this case came from Justice Clarence Thomas, who said to his fellow justices failed to point to a single historical law revoking a citizen's Second Amendment right based on possible interpersonal violence. He said the government should only be able to take away someone's gun rights if they've actually been convicted of a crime.
Meanwhile, the Supreme Court has ruled against a California woman who said her rights were violated when her Salvadorian husband was denied entry to the U.S. This comes shortly after the Biden administration extended asylum protections for illegal immigrants married to U.S. citizens. In a 6-3 ruling along ideological lines, the Supreme Court argued that citizens don't necessarily have the power to influence federal decisions about who gets to live in the U.S. legally. The U.S. consulate in San Salvador flagged Sandra Munoz's husband because his tattoos were thought to be related to the MS-13 gang. Asensio Cordero, who has also been an illegal immigrant in the U.S., denied the allegation, saying he had no criminal history. Liberal Supreme Court judges argued that the State Department's assessment of Asensio Cordero was too vague. Conservative judges argued that while Congress has made it easier for spouses to immigrate, it has not made spousal immigration a matter of right.
And speaking of immigration, hundreds of thousands of people continue flooding across the border. According to the latest government data, over 241,000 illegal border crossers were apprehended in the month of May alone, raising the total number of apprehensions to over 2.2 million this fiscal year. The vast majority of those entries happened at the southwest border, but at the same time, we did also see a record-breaking surge at the northern border as well, as last month, more than 18,000 people tried to illegally cross from Canada into the U.S. That's the largest number for the month of May we've seen on record. Also last month, over 44,000 people were processed through the government's CBP One app. The government has scheduled more than 630,000 migrant appointments since the app was first launched in January of 2023.
At the same time, Republican Senator Ted Cruz is saying the DOJ is too political to prosecute unlawful anti-Israel protesters.
Democrat Party is paralyzed because they want the votes. The Democrats want the votes of these anti-Semites, and so they're unwilling to stand up. Listen, if anyone threatens another student, and we're seeing Jewish students threatened at universities across the country, here's what should happen. If you threaten another student, you should be arrested, you should be prosecuted, you should be expelled, and if you're a foreign student, you should be deported.
His comments came shortly after Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg dropped charges for 31 students out of the 46 who were arrested for occupying Hamilton Hall at Columbia University. Republicans have heavily criticized the Biden administration and the Democratic Party for doing nothing when protesters created Jew exclusion zones on college campuses.
And turning our attention now to the election, specifically the Trump campaign, where the former president drew a rather large crowd in Philadelphia on Saturday. And during his speech there, he slammed Biden's foreign policy, saying we're now on the verge of World War III.
The world is in flames. Our border is overrun. Inflation is raging. Crime is out of control. Europe is in chaos. The Middle East is exploding. Iran is emboldened. China is on the march. And this horrible, horrible president is dragging us toward World War III. We're going to be in World War III soon.
Trump went on to say if reelected, he would build an iron dome over the U.S., just like the missile defense system used in Israel. Trump said his plan would not only protect the country, but would also provide jobs for the American people.
And finally, before a break here, speaking of World War III, the Israeli Defense Minister is speaking with U.S. officials on its conflicts with both Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon. Minister Yoav Gallant and the IDF Chief of Staff are meeting with U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and State Secretary Antony Blinken to address the issue. Minister Gallant will also be meeting with Amos Hochstein, Biden's special envoy. Gallant said his visit will include discussions on developments in Gaza and Lebanon. He further said that his nation is prepared for any action that may be required in Gaza, Lebanon, and in additional areas as well. This information comes as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu continues to assert that the U.S. is slowing down its weapons shipments. And we'll get into more international news when we come back after this break.
Tragically, and all too often, a young mother in an unplanned pregnancy is in crisis. Pressured from others and without the support of the father of the baby, she feels alone, compelled into making a heartbreaking decision she will regret her whole life. But she is not alone. You can be there for her by giving a life-changing ultrasound through Preborn. Seeing her baby on ultrasound is a game changer, doubling the chances she will choose life from 40% to 80%. For only $28 a month, less than $1 a day, you can show a mom her baby on ultrasound. Your love can save a preborn baby and give a lifetime of joy. Give your tax-deductible gift today. Call pound 250 and say the keyword baby, or donate securely at preborn.org/TV.
Well, in our journey through history, let's explore one of the most famous physical pieces of history in the world. This structure was the original sports arena, as it were, at least in the Western world, and it would serve as a model for modern-age professional sports stadiums. Now, the sports that took place in this stadium, though, were vastly different from baseball or football. They were life and death battles, killing for sport and for entertainment for the Roman aristocracy.
To watch more episodes of A Moment in History, go to FISM.tv.
What can you tell our listeners about the benefits of being a partner?
It's blessed me with an opportunity to help further the kingdom in a small way, which matters a lot because God takes small things and makes them big. The blessing really has been to be able to take care of my family, but also take care of the kingdom. Going to bed knowing that not only are you correctly managing your investments, but you're doing it in a God-honoring way.
And welcome back to FISM News. I'm Renata Kiss. Well, let's get into our coverage, our international coverage, that is, starting with Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced yesterday that the intense operation in Gaza is about to end, but he said that an agreement will be on Israel's terms.
If there is an agreement, it will be an agreement according to our terms, and our terms are not to end the war, to leave Gaza and leave Hamas as it is. I refuse to leave Hamas as it is. We need to eliminate it. In the end, you will have to do two things. You will need the ongoing military demilitarization by the Israel Defense Forces, and you will need to establish a civil administration, I hope with the support and management of certain countries in the region.
However, he added that he's not ready to create a two-state solution.
I'll tell you what I'm not ready to do. I'm not ready to establish a Palestinian state there. I'm not ready to hand it over to the Palestinian Authority. I'm not ready to do that.
Overall, Israel's withdrawal from Gaza likely means that the IDF will concentrate its efforts on Iran-backed Hezbollah. Last week, the IDF confirmed that an offensive in Lebanon was approved after the terrorist group had increased its attacks on northern Israel. Should Israel wage war against Hezbollah, thousands of fighters would join the terrorist group, according to officials from Iran-backed factions and analysts.
But as the Israeli military now looks to shift its focus, the Israeli government continues to claim that the U.S. is not giving the weapons it promised. FISM's Ian Patrick has more about that.
As the Israeli military continues its campaign against Hamas terrorists in Gaza, its government is reporting a lack of weapons aid from the U.S., despite assertions to the contrary. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told his cabinet this weekend that there's been a dramatic drop in weapons deliveries from the U.S. Netanyahu specified that this drop had occurred 4 months ago, and he reportedly told his cabinet that, quote, certain items arrived sporadically, but the munitions at large remained behind. Now, if this is in fact true, this accusation would mean that the Biden administration has been privately withholding weapons and ammo since at least February or March of this year. That would change the timeline on the administration's rhetoric regarding weapons provisions to our Middle Eastern ally. It should be said the U.S. did pause a weapons shipment to Israel in May of this year for at least a little while over concern about the military's planned entrance into Rafah. But as far as we know, that was the only drawback of a similar shipment since the October 7th terror attack. But still, these withheld weapons have led to tense exchanges between Israel and the United States, and this latest accusation is likely just to add to this. Most recently, Netanyahu spoke with State Department Secretary Antony Blinken on the matter of weapons being withheld, saying it was inconceivable that the U.S. would even do so.
When Secretary Blinken was recently here in Israel, we had a candid conversation. I said I deeply appreciated the support the U.S. has given Israel from the beginning of the war. But I also said something else. I said it's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel. During World War II, Churchill told the United States, give us the tools, we'll do the job. And I say, give us the tools and we'll finish the job a lot faster.
But weirdly, it isn't just Israel which is speaking up on the matter. In fact, at least one American politician is beginning to call out a similar pattern. Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton, a Republican, recently slammed President Biden for what he said was, quote, deliberately misleading the American people on weapons provisions to our ally. In a letter written on June 20th to the Biden administration, Senator Cotton said that they are also insulting a key ally, at least according to his claim. And in fact, here's what that claim says, quote, as you are aware, the Arms Export Control Act requires the administration to notify Congress before sending weapons to a foreign country. Your administration has manipulated this requirement by withholding this formal notification to Congress of approved weapons sales, including F-15s, tactical vehicles, 120mm mortars, 120mm tank rounds, joint direct attack munitions, and small diameter bombs. Your administration can then claim that the weapons are in process while never actually delivering them. Senator Cotton, at the end of his letter, requests that the Biden administration provide information on which weapons and ammo were supposed to have been sent to Israel. This is Ian Patrick reporting for FISM News.
Thanks for that report, Ian. Meanwhile, the United Nations is calling for a concrete system of aid delivery to citizens in Gaza following a spate of lawless behavior. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said on Friday that the aid distribution in the area is full of chaos and they are unable to fully deliver unpromised aid.
The situation in Gaza became a situation of total lawlessness. Most of the trucks with humanitarian aid inside Gaza are now looted. We see extreme difficulty in distributing inside Gaza. So the problem is not only to bring things to Gaza, there must be a mechanism guaranteeing that there is a minimum of law and order that allows for that distribution to take place.
Guterres said that groups of armed men, notably Hamas, are continually interrupting aid convoys and even taking the aid for themselves. The Israeli military has since responded, saying it was establishing a new safe corridor into southern Gaza.
Elsewhere, tens of thousands of protesters rallied in downtown Tel Aviv over the weekend, demanding Netanyahu's government resign and a deal to free the remaining hostages trapped in Gaza. Here's some of what that looked like.
2 days ago, it was reported that the number of living hostages may be as low as 50. 50 out of the 120 still being held by Hamas. The days go by. The deal to get them out is stalled, and they end up dead in captivity. Because Netanyahu does not want a deal, their blood is on the hands of Netanyahu and his government.
Protesters accused Netanyahu of creating unnecessary tension with the U.S. instead of working on a hostage deal. It's also important to note, though, that despite frustrations with the prime minister, Israelis still overwhelmingly support the war in Gaza itself. A recent Pew Research poll found 39% of Israelis say Israel's military response against Hamas has been about right, while 34% actually say it's not gone far enough. Only 19% think it's gone too far, though there are overwhelming concerns about the war expanding to other regions and the overall length of the war so far.
Meanwhile, over the weekend, officials from the military Central Command claimed that U.S. forces destroyed 3 Houthi vessels in the Red Sea. The 3 unmanned ships were reportedly destroyed in separate incidents, but in retaliation, Houthi forces launched missiles into the Red Sea. There was no reported damage from either the military or nearby merchant vessels. Officials also dismissed claims from Houthi forces that they had successfully struck the aircraft carrier Dwight D. Eisenhower. Officials from CENTCOM described the claims as categorically false. The announcement comes a week after the U.S. destroyed radar equipment and an additional unmanned vessel. The U.S. has increased its presence in the Red Sea region primarily to combat aggressive behavior from rebel Houthi forces. The rebel group has reportedly attacked over 60 commercial ships as of June. 2 of those ships have sunk.
And let's get a quick update to the war in Ukraine. Russian officials now say that as of yesterday, 6 people, sadly including 2 children, were killed over the weekend and over 100 injured as well in a Ukrainian drone strike on the Crimean city of Sevastopol. Yet another person, they say, was also killed in a separate attack in Russia's Belgorod region. Russia claims Ukraine used U.S.-supplied weapons in those attacks, which it called a deliberate missile strike on civilians. Russian officials claim to have shot down 33 Ukrainian drones in border regions over the weekend. Meanwhile, at least 4 people were killed by Russian attacks in Ukraine. All right, and we have plenty more news to get to coming up next. But first, in honor of the 2-year anniversary of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, let's go to a moment in history.
Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. In this segment, let's take a journey back in the history of America and discuss something of great importance to our country's legacy. We'll explore a battle within our nation, and it's one that touches on religion, class, race, politics, and so much more. It involves the protection and defense of the most vulnerable people group in human society, unborn children. Let's explore the complicated and marked history of the fight for the protection of life in America. Now, sadly, I have to tell you that this moment in history is in many ways a black mark on our country, but we cannot tell the story and see the goodness that comes out of such a black mark without touching on the preeminent legal case in the fight for life, and that was Roe v. Wade in the United States Supreme Court in 1973. Before Roe v. Wade, abortion was virtually illegal across the United States. It was up to the states to determine the legality of pre-birth infanticide, and until the 1960s, literally all the states in the Union agreed that abortion was a crime, with few exceptions. Now, in the late 60s and early 70s, as the sexual revolution began its first stages, a handful of states legalized the procedure, but on the eve of Roe v. Wade, abortion was still a crime in the nation. Then in 1973, the United States Supreme Court issued a ruling on a case between a woman from Texas who became known as Jane Roe and Henry Wade, a prosecutor in Texas who had argued that the woman's 1969 abortion should be punished under the law. On January 22, 1973, the Supreme Court shockingly ruled in favor of Jane Roe and in doing so shattered Texas's laws criminalizing abortion. The ruling opened the door for widespread and legalized abortion in the United States. And for the next 49 years, 63.5 million babies were murdered in the womb in the United States. Now, I don't mean to bring a dark cloud over today's moment in history, but this is something that we must talk about. It is one of the greatest evils of this generation and of this country's history that many innocent babies have been robbed of life. This is a genocide unprecedented in world history and 10 times as deadly as the Holocaust of World War II. Now, this moment in history should remind us of the great need to stand up and speak out for those who cannot. But more than that, I hope that we are reminded today of the great love that God has for the little ones. So let's be encouraged today as we think about these little lives that God knew and loved each of them from the moment that they were conceived. Now, on A Moment in History, we often study history from the long past, but in the very recent past, by God's grace, in fact, in the summer of 2022, the United States Supreme Court, led by a heavily conservative majority, overturned the ghastly Roe v. Wade decision under severe controversy at the time. And it was one of the great examples of God's grace in recent memory, where one of the most horrid Supreme Court rulings was turned on its head. And in the next year alone, more than 30,000 babies' lives were saved because of it. Thanks so much for joining me once again for A Moment in History.
Through the ministry of Preborn, the Financial Issues family has saved tens of thousands of lives of babies. What an amazing job that God has done through you, the Financial Issues family. Would you join us in saving the lives of babies? What an amazing reunion we will have in glory, meeting all the people that we have saved. Please go to preborn.org, that is preborn.org, or financialissues.org, and click on the Preborn banner.
There are moments in life that define us. Choices determine the courses we take. Choices that create life, or those that save a life. And some make life worthwhile. There are decisions to stay or to go, to remain the same or to grow. Sometimes we pray and make peace. Other times we take a stand for what we believe. In celebration, mourning, triumph, and defeat, we are invested in every decision we seek. Despite differences, we have one thing in common, the desire to do all for the glory of God. Keep your wallet aligned with your heart and your investments in harmony with your faith. Timothy Plan, biblically responsible mutual funds, ETFs, and retirement plans. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objective, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com. Read carefully before investing.
Hey there, and welcome back to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case. Well, we start off this segment with a rather tragic story coming out of the state of Arkansas, where a shooter attacked a local supermarket on Friday, killing 4 people in the process and wounding 9 others, including 2 police officers. That shooting took place in a small town some 70 miles south of Little Rock. The shooter began firing indiscriminately in the parking lot and then moved inside the store, armed with a 12-gauge shotgun and a pistol as well. Officials have still yet to determine a motive for the shooter and have called the shooting a completely random, senseless act. The suspect was wounded by police in a shootout and is now facing 4 counts of capital murder.
Meanwhile, Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds declared an emergency yesterday following record-breaking flooding in Sioux County. She wrote on X that she directed all available state resources to assist Rock Valley and other communities in northwest Iowa in response to catastrophic flooding. Rock Valley was one of the hardest hit cities in the county. According to local news, on Saturday, about 1,500 residents had to evacuate the area with a helicopter. The water has since begun to subside, and volunteers can now help with the cleanup efforts. However, they cannot enter houses and other structures before safety inspections. Governor Reynolds added that she requested to fast-track a presidential disaster declaration for Sioux County. She said that more counties will be added to that list as well. Iowa hasn't seen this level of flooding since 1993. The governor added that the devastation is widespread.
The images there are certainly shocking, and we'll have to be praying for the people of Iowa as well. Meanwhile, speaking of the weather, or at least somewhat here, climate protesters, well, they continue to disrupt public events this week. Most recently, a golf tournament in Connecticut. 6 people were detained yesterday for setting off smoke bombs during the final round of the PGA's Traveler Championship and also dumping a strange powdery substance on the putting green of the 18th hole. The chaos occurred right as the final group had arrived at the hole. The play was then delayed for about 15 minutes before it finally resumed. But weirdly enough, that wasn't all yesterday, as earlier in the day, climate activists also blocked the entrance of another golf championship, this one in the Netherlands, causing delays of about 2 hours.
Meanwhile, on the other side of culture, former President Trump is now trying to win over evangelicals. On Saturday, he spoke at a Faith and Freedom Coalition conference where crowds chanted USA as he took the stage. Trump urged supporters at the event not to sit on the sidelines this election. Trump also said he would commit to displaying the 10 Commandments in public schools while criticizing Democrats for not wanting it displayed.
Rest you, who likes the 10 Commandments, by the way, going up in the schools? They think it's such a bad thing. I said, has anyone read the "Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt..." I mean, has anybody read this incredible stuff? It's just incredible. They don't want it to go up. It's a crazy world, you know, a crazy world.
He added on Truth Social that bringing back the 10 Commandments could be the first step to a religious revival that the U.S. desperately needs. Trump's stance on the 10 Commandments comes after Republican Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry signed a school choice bill into law last week, mandating the Judeo-Christian laws to be displayed in public schools.
And wrapping up today's show, today does mark the 2-year anniversary since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. And in light of that anniversary, the Biden campaign has been absolutely barnstorming the country to highlight the president's pro-abortion agenda, which Democrats, of course, see as the key to Biden's re-election in November. President Biden released a new ad this morning casting Republicans as extremists on the abortion issue, while at the same time vowing to restore Roe v. Wade.
Decades of progress shattered just because the last guy got 4 years in the White House. We know what will happen if he gets another 4. For MAGA Republicans, Roe is just the beginning. They're going to try to ban the right to choose nationwide. They're coming for IVF and birth control next. We're up against extremism. Send me back to the White House and I'll fight like hell to restore Roe v. Wade and protect American freedom.
But during a recent interview, Trump said Democrats were the ones that are the real extremists for refusing to ban late-term abortions, while at the same time saying the issue should ultimately be left up to the states.
There's been a lot of radicalism talked about, and the radicalism is really on the left because they're willing to do abortions in the 8th and 9th month, and even beyond that. But just to put it simply, it's now up to the states. And like Ronald Reagan, I'm a believer in the exceptions, the 3 exceptions, as you know. Rape, incest, life of the mother, the danger for the life of the mother. And we have a situation now where it's in the states' hands, and the states are going to be voting. The people are going to be voting.
Trump, during that interview, then went on to say he would not support a federal abortion ban, which, as we've talked about here on the news, that's something that many pro-lifers want him to push, but he's backing off because he thinks it's a losing issue. So we'll have to see if that costs him with pro-lifers. I doubt that it will, though, because he's right. The Democrats are just very extreme on this issue.
They are, and I think if he wants to win more independent-minded people, they would also not want a federal ban. So. All right, well, that's our program for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and please visit FISMnews.tv for more content.
That's right, and you probably know the drill. You can find us on social media as well. We'll see you tomorrow with more news coverage.